I'm the director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute, and we have been running the Science Religion Lunch Seminar meetings for a while. And we have today a person who's been giving us really good talks. She's going to be giving another one for us today. I'll introduce her in a moment, but first I want to let people know in 2 weeks from today, there will be a discussion between Howard Dahl and Jack Zaleski on free speech. It is a community discussion. And so we will be hosting that event. We'll have more information going out in a while. But first, I want us to give as much time as we can to Ann Denton, because she always has thoughtful talks. Ann Denton is professor in the computer science department at North Dakota State University. She received her PhD in physics from the Johannes Gutenberg University, and I'm not going to try Mainz, Germany, in 1996, and an MS in computer science from NDSU in 2003. Her research interests are in data mining of diverse scientific data sets. Those data sets prompted her to identify ethical concepts that are rigorous enough to steer future data science research, and we've discussed them. Denton has published more than 80 peer-reviewed journal and conference publication, has led projects funded at a total of more than $1 million. So let's welcome our speaker.
Thank you, Dennis, for the introduction. Fake news. I'm in computer science. I teach the social implications of computers class, which is the ethics class for our majors. This is the sort of thing that we talk about, that Facebook and other media, social media in particular, have become really notorious for allowing things to be shared that are just not true. And it's very difficult to fact check them, and it's very difficult to go about things that are fact checked and come out to be false, like this one. People claim to have said things that they never said. How are you going to know? There are even issues that you can produce what's called deep fakes, where people really look like they're saying things on camera and they didn't really say them. There are plenty of those around for Mark Zuckerberg. I decided to just stick with a plain text version. Good reasons not to fact check posts, which works as long as you are the victim, and so that's why some of these are deliberately set up to make Mark Zuckerberg be the victim. There have been plenty of talks in this group too about fake news. One of the problems, obviously, is that some of the people who most shout fake news may well also be the people who generate the fake news. So it's a topic that can cover many presentations in itself, and I definitely spend a lot of time on it when talking with computer science majors. So I mean, what do we conclude? Are these computer science majors the big villains? Because it's really only the platforms that enable this. I mean, before there was no fake news before Facebook came around, right? I mean, fake news is really created by Facebook, right? And why? Well, because of context, propaganda, satire, clickbaits, and so on. So it's the financial interests, the echo chambers. We've all heard it. So how about this? Was this also created by Facebook? Well, I mean, let me first ask whether or not among the people here in the audience, who has heard the statement, "Do not trust any statistics you did not fake yourself"? Has anybody heard this? You don't count. So if I ask the same question in Germany, and I have asked the same question among Germans, I have yet to meet any German who hasn't heard the German version of this statement. Ich traue keiner Statistik, die ich nicht selber gefälscht habe. Some people will know that, no, quote unquote know that Churchill said it. Some people won't, but everybody pretty much has heard the statement. Which is a strange situation when Germans know something that an English person said, and no English person knows this. And it actually, so in the defense of Facebook, it really was Facebook that exposed to lots of Germans that strangely, this Churchill quote was well known among all Germans and no British person. Because suddenly, of course, in social media, it enabled people to figure out such things. So in 2004, the Baden-Württemberg, which is the south western corner of Germany, the statistical state agency studied this. And they concluded that there was no evidence that Churchill ever said this, which, I mean, it probably doesn't surprise you because you never heard it anyway. But what they did find was that the Nazis had good reason to create this propaganda because by discrediting Churchill, that played into their hands, right? I mean, if Churchill just faked statistics, that means that any time that Churchill claimed that the Allied forces were winning in World War II, he really was just forging statistics, right? So this was a clear case of war propaganda. The thing that's mind-blowing to me, considering the number of times I have heard people who I know were opposed to the Nazis still quoted decades after the war, how long the propaganda outlasted the regime that created it. I mean, 2004. And the other thing that I think is interesting about it is that it has this deep sense of humor that's, I mean, in the US people and in Britain, people will quote Mark Twain. There are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. That's every time somebody in the US or in Britain would quote Mark Twain, Germans don't quote Mark Twain, they quote Churchill instead, which, I mean, in fact, it makes you feel nice about Churchill because, I mean, he said this cool thing, but he didn't see it. so this Mark Twain quote, basically, I find it really, it makes you question the things that you hear. And it also shows that the people who create propaganda can be awfully darn clever about what moves people and what's an attractive myth to create. So now we have established, well, okay, it's not the technology, except that actually it was the technology. It was just different technology. The Nazi Germany would not have been possible the way it happened without technology. It was the first radio, the first generation of not the first radio, of course, but the first generation of widely sold radios that made this possible, that suddenly there was this voice of authority speaking in just about everybody's living room, and people weren't used to that. And so they were fooled much more easily than they would have been otherwise. It was new technology, and people hadn't built the defenses against it. So, okay, so now we know it's always the technology, but it's always the newest technology. You can question this a little bit further because, I mean, why is Greenland called Greenland? Greenland is called Greenland because it's propaganda. Greenland isn't green, and I mean, of course, you can argue, well, maybe it was the technology that time that created the change with the boats, but I mean, you can stretch anything how far we want. I mean, the reality is, I mean, we we have yet to establish that there ever was a time without propaganda. And I mean, spoiler alert, I don't think there ever was. There also has always been, I mean, the idea that you can so easily distinguish science from non-science. I mean, bloodletting actually at the time, even in the 1800s, was science. People stopped using it, not because the science contradicted it, they stopped using it because neither the patients nor the doctors really liked it anymore. Also, I mean, the people now who say that the science isn't telling us the right thing for COVID, they still using the results of science. I mean, okay, the use of ivermectin has not been shown using science, but they still making use of medical treatments. This is somewhat complicated, but it gets yet more complicated. And I will just give you a moment to read the statement. So, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about science? I mean, is it possible to heal somebody by touching a coat of a person of faith? If this is your only strategy, that might be a little bit tricky. So what is it then? I mean, is it an allegory? I mean, I think most people will probably hear, so starting this list from the bottom, will probably say it's an allegory, right? I mean, there are certainly people who say it's true. There are people who probably have some level of belief in magic. Maybe it was pre-scientific medicine. Sloppy journalism, propaganda, and fake news is sort of more to just, well, why is it not that? I mean, I will tell you, I do not use this slide in my social implications class. I did not advertise this talk in my social implications class either, although I did give students extra credit for the free speech presentation that was in this context 3 weeks ago. Because there is a climate where this sort of thing it will probably not cost me $10,000 to say this in class, because we're not in Oklahoma and I'm not teaching in secondary school. But I mean, there is a sort of a gray area between what is still enough that if somebody goes and protests about me, somebody may decide, well, I'm not the right person to teach the social implications class, right? So, I mean, yeah, a gray area. And getting to that, one thing that I do spend a lot of time on in my social implications class is the First Amendment. And I mean, I think the First Amendment right there makes very clear why this idea that free speech and the ability to say controversial things is not something that started with Facebook, and is something that where you cannot really take religious belief out, why that has been there forever. I mean, the First Amendment was the first time people actually tried to protect people against blasphemy laws. I mean, any other country at the time, there was some concept of blasphemy that prevented people from saying certain things. The question, well, are miracles? What's the distinction between miracles and fake news? I mean, I only learned a couple of days ago, because my background is not in philosophy. I only learned a couple of days ago, and Dennis can correct me on this, but that David Hume apparently was the first person to to really make a strong philosophical argument that that we shouldn't treat miracles any different from false testimony. And that is something that we still can't do without risking repercussions for blasphemy. And I actually also thought it was funny that when I proposed this talk, I just sort of randomly threw it out there because it was something I wanted to talk about. And Dennis put it into the category of free speech, which at that point, I didn't see it really as a primarily free speech talk, but it is. I mean, it very clearly is, as you can see from the discussion. So I mean, I will still pursue this idea that maybe we should treat religion differently from fake news a little bit further, because I mean, I think some arguments can be made that maybe we do need religion. I mean, after all, there is no science of morality. In fact, there are limits to what scientific statements you even can make about morality, and even secular philosophy is certainly not entirely scientifically demonstrable. So there are limits to what science can or cannot do when it comes to saying what we ought to do, and that's a lot of what religion does. So I mean, one could make the argument, well, science doesn't belong there, and religion is the place to go, and go back to the allegory hypothesis. In fact, is one thing that I thought was interesting when, as a teenager, I looked at the Bible that we think my parents got for their wedding. They aren't completely sure about that anymore, but anyway, it's a Lutheran Bible, and it had all sorts of explanations of the miracles in it. So I mean, the Lutheran tradition actually does very explicitly view some things as allegories. You can probably not read it. It's even if you could see it up close, it would still be in German. It would still be tiny. So anyway, it was just this is an actual Bible that my parents they sent me the photo. Anyway, so it's there are churches that are perfectly willing to accept that miracles are true literally, and just maintain basically the allegorical value why we rely on this. And I mean, it's not like scientists despise allegories. I mean, I have always been fortunate enough to be among people who were better at quoting Lord of the Rings than the Bible. So I think that's one way of establishing that what kind of people you're around. And I mean, there's a lot of allegorical wisdom in the Lord of the Rings. I put a quote in there which I still would have memorized as a teenager just because I liked it so much. It's actually also happens one that gets some people to be annoyed because it can be viewed as anti-science. So I'll again give you a few moments to read it. I think it's a beautiful statement. I don't take it to mean that you can't break light or that you can't look at anything scientifically, but just make sure that. So to me personally, it just means that if you're really destroying something for the sake of understanding it, that's problematic. So this just to show there are thought-provoking allegories in other books than the Bible, and scientists, even if not all scientists like this particular quote, a lot of scientists quote Lord of the Rings. There are mythical stories that are explicitly created so that we can understand what religious belief means. The Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster was explicitly created to question the teaching of evolution in schools. So maybe then all is good. Maybe then it's just a bunch of allegories. We need lots of allegories. This is a shared set of allegories, so maybe we shouldn't really worry. Except that I don't think it is as simple as that. And I'll again leave you a few moments here. So here we have the statement, all living creatures are yours for food. Just as I gave you the plants, I now give you everything else. This is the basis for the allegories that we live by. And I mean, what does it mean? I mean, does it mean that these chimpanzees that are 98.6% like us are suddenly our food? We don't believe it for chimpanzees, but I mean, pigs aren't that far further off, and we do believe it for pigs. I mean, of course, online you can find all sorts of ways in which people point out the logic-defying properties and problematic implications of still believing and still teaching kids in Sunday school stories that don't hold up to even the most basic consistency checks. I mean, how do you put lions together with their prey on a boat for 40 days kind of thing? My personal concern isn't so much even about the well, no, I think my personal concern is equally training people to accept illogic, but also the very direct implications that we accept treatment of animals, that if we didn't have this, if we didn't accept this blanket animals were given to us, I think they would be logic defying that it should be okay to treat chickens and pigs and cows the way we do. And that's, I don't even think is the worst of it. I think the worst of it is that here since 1970, we've lost 2/3 of the wildlife. I mean, without this statement, all of this was given to us, how would we justify that? But we are just implicitly still, even if we are not literally believing in the Bible, we're still accepting the mindset. And why do we do this? I mean, there are a lot of the same things that hold for Facebook. I mean, if somebody stands up high, we tend to trust the person. If somebody's on a pedestal, on a platform, has a microphone, they get a bigger voice, and churches create that kind of difference in ability to speak to a large group of people. And I mean, honestly, I think churches are also very much the ancient echo chambers, not just because they have a great echo, but also because it's always the people with the same belief who you're talking with. You're immersing yourself in the people who have the same beliefs that you do, which actually is more the conventional thing to happen than the attempts at the unbiased reporting that newspapers at least still try to maintain. However successful or unsuccessful they are, but I mean, if you go to a particular church, immerse yourself with people with the same beliefs, you're going to get more of an echo chamber experience. And I mean, these types of echo chambers go back as long as we have written history. So anyway, I don't think that fake news is a new phenomenon. I don't think there is any cutoff we can place. I think it's inherent to the deepest beliefs we share. And I do think it matters. I think we take those beliefs for granted and we allow them to have an impact on our world that we don't question.
I'm going to be mean and take the first question. It's rude of me. Tyler, you want to keep track of what's in chat?
Yeah.
When you were talking about this, I was thinking about something that we're talking about in one of my classes, natural rights. So natural rights come from about the time of the Enlightenment, they come up with these things. They're supposed to be self-evident, as we see from Locke and in the Declaration of Independence. Bentham said they are nonsense on stilts because he says, where are they? What are they actually, these things we're called? But if you question, and by the way, I don't think natural rights, moral rights exist. Would that be an instance of fake news, or am I just blinding myself to something that a lot of people will get very angry about if I said this whole thing that the US is talking about with rights and the Declaration of Independence are just social political rights. There's no such thing as a natural right.
So, and I mean, I'm still learning some of the background of, so my interpretation is that what we view as rights is the result of essentially a Rawls type reasoning. We, as the human community that can express things verbally and in writing, we have a benefit in establishing that there is a lower, a baseline that we don't want to go below, because it's in everybody's interest to have that established. So, I mean, to the extent that, I mean, among humans, so excluding the natural world and the future and so on, but among current humans, I would go as far as saying that Rawls' veil of ignorance is the most scientific argument you can make about morality, and to be really specific, only the veil of ignorance, not the principles. The principles is not even the idea of a social contract. Well, social contract, I mean, if you view it just as a contract, then fine, but that there ought to be a contract is not scientific either. But the idea that and I think you said this sometime, I've been quoting you on this, so I hope it's correct that pretty much every religion has a golden rule.
Yeah.
So I view so golden rule, I think also is scientific at the most basic level. The veil of ignorance is basically the taking the golden rule one step further and not just talking about actions, but talking about narratives. So I mean, I would oversimplifying say that the veil of ignorance is the golden rule as applied to narratives. And so in that sense, I would then see natural rights as being the status of where the veil of ignorance reasoning had come at the time that people came up with it. So it was based on they don't exist by themselves, but it does make sense that a society that has established narratives would also establish a sort of the minimum of what you allow the veil of ignorance, applying the veil of ignorance. I mean, what is the absolute minimum that you would want to accept people to do to you?
Right, but I think that's social political, right? So it's part of the contract that we have to have in order to have a society to exist. But if we're talking about Locke and about the original founding fathers, they thought in a state of nature, you had these rights that were God-given to you. And even if you
Anything,
didn't-
so anything that beyond what I just said, I would consider fake news, yes.
But I'm wondering, I think you're onto something really important here, which is, and I don't want to mischaracterize you, but there's almost an easy button that people like easier, simpler solutions to complex problems. If you can't find a simple solution to a complex problem, you're not searching hard enough approach, is the way they're doing it. So when you're talking about the stories in the allegories and so on, it's simplifying very complex issues. It makes people happy. Besides, they've got an entity who cares for them. So I think that's a really interesting point that you're bringing up. But I should stop because I think, is there anybody who?
We don't have any questions in the chat yet. I gotta go. Thank you. So for those online, if anyone has a question or a comment with Anne's talk, please post it in the chat and we will get to you.
And just say we're controlling these very carefully. So if you put something in there, we'll of course. But I want to go on with the power. Also, there's
one.
So what we do? Yeah.
So, yep. Yagna has. So what do we do about fake news? How to discriminate? Excuse me.
So I mean, I think that bringing it back to dealing with information with propaganda and all of these things historically provides good guidance as to some guidance as to what are the sorts of things that help and what are the sorts of things that don't help. I mean, clearly, free speech is the first thing that maybe the most obvious thing that has been used to deal with suppression of people who try to identify what is fake. So I mean, giving a voice to those who point out that something is wrong is I think in a lot of ways key to that. Keeping the voices out there that point out what is wrong. That's historically what has worked. So that I guess the two in my presentation, the two last slides that I had, there was one about echo chambers and there was one about flat platforms, and I think that those are the two key things key concepts we have to work with to deal with fake news. If somebody is elevated on a platform who is saying demonstrably wrong things, we've got a problem. And if we've got echo chambers where people are only surrounded by those who think like them, we also have a problem. Both of those translate to most contexts. I mean, in Facebook, if Facebook really made an effort to not promote, to just not place the fake information as high in people's news feeds, they don't need to censor anybody. They just need to make sure that the algorithms don't favor the false information over the true information. And I mean, I think they're getting a little bit better at it, but the financial interests often go against those common sense interests. And similarly, with the echo chambers, just if they didn't, I mean, right now they don't show you any information that you don't like. And I think that's the problem. If they were trying to create a more diverse, so people who establish friendships across belief divisions still don't see the posts by those other people because of the way the algorithms are set up. So that's, there's plenty that Facebook could do without censoring anybody by just adjusting the way they elevate narratives or exclude narratives. That's really the two buttons that pretty much anybody has. Allow people on stage who don't say the normal thing. So I don't know if that answers the question. But.
I have a question. People are emailing me too.
Oh.
Because I think some people are afraid of our presence. So this one's from Terrence, and he's asking, is the problem actually that people can't understand what fake news is rather than it being about the source? I think that means, somebody could ask me if I'm wrong about this. I think it means the problem is people don't have the ability to understand fake news or to discern it.
Well, that's the motivation of this talk, right? I mean, that was what motivated this talk, because we don't act, because from my perspective, 3/4 of what from my perspective is fake news does not even get labeled as it, because it is viewed under some religious whatever. You can't offend religious speech. I mean, Alan and I watched a movie about flat earthers, and I got more and more upset at the movie because it was always the scientists versus the people who believe that the earth is flat, but never was there any mentioning that a lot of the stories in the Bible that people do say everywhere went uncriticized. I mean, how can you understand flat earthers if you're not willing to believe, if you're not willing to address the people who believe that touching somebody's coat will magically heal you in a moment? I mean, it's much of what has a similar truth value to the flat earth, whatever goes unquestioned, because there are people who legitimately in the biggest churches make the statements. I mean, what is it of what was that? Mary, as in her whole body, went up into space in the what ascension thingamabob. I don't even. I mean, there's so many things that are mind-blowingly wrong and that you cannot criticize, because if so, you might get slapped $10,000 bills.
Oh, well, the attempts to legislate speech are frightening, are absolutely frightening. And I think you're right about that. But I want to go back to my point about simple, that people love simple, that maybe propaganda works because it simplifies complex situations, and it also is appealing to deep-seated beliefs and feelings of an individual. So if you already have tendencies to say dislike a particular race, then short, sweet stories of nastiness about this particular race are more likely to be believed than ones that say, look, you're absolutely wrong about this race. In fact, there's no similarity. There's just a human race with variations.
So I'm sure what you say, there's a lot of truth to that, except that I don't think the simplicity is what causes the problem, because you could present the things easily and briefly and so on. And I mean, think about the concept of environmental footprints, so there are simple concepts that have had huge impact quickly until I think actually, yeah, there's also the ecological footprint, I think is a good example of where I see the problem is, I think, maybe. So it was a concept that was supposed to make it really simple and sweet and understandable, not sweet, but understandable, what's going wrong, and to show we all use way more resources than we can, and things like climate change are pre-programmed just by the resources we use. So it's a very simple thing, and just a handful of scientists convinced lots of people because they were able to make it really nice and simple. And it worked well for the first few years until the oil industry discovered that this was actually also a great trick for moving blame away from them, because if everybody is to blame, then they are not to blame. And I mean, it's the same, but both can be true simultaneously. It can be simultaneously true that getting us to understand that we're using, I think now, something like 6 times as many resources as we sustainably can, and hence things like climate change are inherent to what every one of us does. That can be true, and it can simultaneously be true that using that as a policy or using that as a narrative, as an advertising sort of thing, can be used to keep it that way. I mean, I see it the same. I see a parallel between that and these "Be Nice" billboards that we had in North Dakota at one point, where the British comedian who made a funny a program about late night show. Help me. Huh?
Late show.
Yeah, I thought so. Anyway, doesn't matter. So he made fun of why North Dakota had all these "Be Nice" billboards, which I think he figured out was from the oil industry. Because I mean, if you tell people be nice, I mean, and that's the churches, of course, do that too. If you tell people be nice, they're not going to tell you to stop exploiting the environment. So the fact that "Be Nice" is actually an excellent thing to keep societies functioning well, because you can cut down on violence and all of that. I mean, all these studies that actually religiosity leads to better outcomes in societies. But at the same time, you're also giving people power who may not have. Was it John Oliver? Came up with myself. So anyway, so the same, this "Be Nice" that actually really is good advice. If you want people to get along and get something done productively, it can also be used by the oil industry to keep you from protesting unacceptable exploitation. This works with the conventional morality. I mean, I think the "Be Nice" is sort of the simplest abstraction of religious, of Christian morality. Be nice and love people. It's even better than, anyway. So that can be with conventional morality. You have these two sides of the same simple statement: be nice. And the same thing happens for live within your environmental or your ecological footprint. On the one hand, it makes it crystal clear what's going wrong. On the other hand, it defeats any further action, because then you're basically taking the blame away from all the advertising that the oil industry does. Simplicity has a lot to do with it, but I mean, as a scientist, I do believe in simplicity. I do think, though, that ultimately what we have to understand is who is using the simplicity and how. I mean, it is the propaganda and the manipulation. I mean, it's ultimately, it's the manipulative power. The simplicity in itself, I don't see as a problem. And I, as a scientist, I mean, you don't understand anything without trying to simplify it to something really crisp. What I think is the issue is what we have to understand is how simple things are used in a manipulative way.
Well, I also think that what you just said about be nice is perfect, because being nice is different from being kind. Kindness requires sometimes you slap a hand. You say to somebody, you need to take care of this, and you make them do it. Niceness is not causing waves, not causing problems. So I think that was a really good piece to bring up here.
Well, I mean, I sort of got on, I felt like I got a little bit under pressure in the first paper that I sort of wrote in the ethics context was about environmental footprints. And then now my kids have been bombarding me with how, and even Naomi Oreskes wrote a paper about how the oil industry is abusing the environmental footprint idea so badly. So the analogy to the be nice and the oil industry and John Oliver, that was sort of my way of defending myself.
Well, as folks know who are online, if you could type in questions and can answer anything that you've got. I'm more than happy to keep talking with her because this is a really interesting conversation. So, but I don't want it to be all about me. If you want to say something, just put it in. We'll move immediately to your question, if that's all right.
Maybe could I just fill in the air here? Quick question. So, I mean, you showed that fake news is nothing new. It goes back to the dawn of human history, right? But maybe I'm showing my age, but it just seems to me in the last 15 years, something has qualitatively changed with the advent of social media, just the sheer volume of fake news. Now, from your perspective, has something really changed, or is it just that it's always been around? And I mean, is it, and it gets to the question in the chat earlier about, you know, how do we discriminate? So it seems to be getting harder and harder to discriminate.
So I do think something has changed qualitatively. Social media have a different communication structure than previous media, and that puts us into a risky kind of situation. From a database person's perspective, the radio was one-to-many communication, whereas social media are many-to-many communication. So inherently, I think one can make the argument that it is even a fairness increasing medium. In the net, that basically just balances the other thing that it gets harder to distinguish truth from fake attempts. False information. As a matter of personal opinion, I think that if you were to include every proclaiming of a miracle into the fake news pot, the balance would be pretty even. I think the reason why we feel like we are exposed to so much more fake news has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of the fake news doesn't get labeled as fake news. I do think that, and I mean, I don't have numbers for this, but I do get the impression that for example, the awareness of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster is probably much higher now than it would have been without social media, because people who talk about such things, even if they are at a distance, can find each other more easily. So, I mean, I think that as long as you exclude sort of certified miracles, you may well be right, but as soon as you include the religious fake news, I'm not so sure that really there is much more of it now.
So part of it is we talked about just the vastness of social media, where there's such a large output, it's so continuous and immensely shared. Even for people that are able to kind of go through and distill what is fake news, what is not fake news, what has bias, how much bias in it. I can't imagine the amount of hours that takes in doing so. No one's got enough time in their day to really go through doing that. So Google and Facebook have kind of come under attack for different, not only fake news, but harmful ads that they have kind of enabled on their sites that you won't find on TV, you won't find on radio shows. Okay, what are your thoughts on kind of the harmful ads that they promote and how can the society do better? Because if you kind of go too much, then you're talking about censorship in some way too.
So I can answer this on I guess on two levels. So let's maybe before I take off on a tangent. Yeah, ads. So on a literal level, yes, it's a huge issue. Can it be avoided? Well, I mean, the companies live from ad income. That's sort of, I mean, some of it, yes, it's bad. And I mean, we like to blame Google. We don't like to, it's a lot easier to blame Google than to blame some other entities, and especially the well-established ones. Right now, two thoughts that I was going to pursue, and now I've lost the one that I wanted to immediately go with. But I think so. Let me get back to that tangent that initially came to my mind. There is the temptation to think that because of all that fake news, we are now sliding into chaos, anarchy, whatever. I mean, the freedom truck thing is all of this due because of our inability to distinguish fake news from real news. And actually, to some extent, I might even say yes. So one simple answer to that is, and I may need Dennis's more detailed information on this. I heard at one point, at some time, that in the Renaissance, when the church lost its tight hold on the people, belief in magic skyrocketed. This is something that, I mean, they wouldn't call it skyrocketed then, I'm sure, but anyway, no rockets, whatever, increased sharply. That is established, right? So I think we are in that kind of phase. And I mean, I think the answer is, I think that gives a broader answer to everybody's questions to some extent. What was, in hindsight, what was really the problem in the Renaissance? Was it that the churches were losing power? Or was it that we weren't used to the situation in which the churches did lose power? So I think we are again in that kind of situation. I think that, and I think the power that the churches have had I mean, going back to the fourth or fifth last slide in my presentation, where I mean, I think that some of the crimes we currently commit to livestock, to wildlife, to the climate, even to future people, some of those crimes are absolutely horrific, and the conventional news media, I don't know to what extent they deliberately suppress them, but there is just this consensus that you can't question I mean, and yes, they do deliberately suppress it, right? I mean, there are laws in North Dakota about what happens to you if you take a camera into a chicken establishment. I mean, you get jailed, right? I mean, so there is deliberate suppression of a lot of truth.
There's Dean Knudsen has a question. Have critical thinking skills decreased over the past 20, 50, 100 years, do you think?
Well, I teach social implications, and Dean knows 489, 689. If so, I see absolutely no evidence of that. I'm completely in awe how well our seniors who have sometimes surprising trouble with databases, but how extremely capable they are at maintaining discussions about topics that previously I would have viewed as philosophic problems. And I mean, I assign them, the way I do it is following the high school debate club rules of one side of the classroom is pro, one side of the classroom is con, and then after some time we swap. Barely ever does anybody, even with the complex arguments, forget which side they are supposed to be arguing on. I mean, and I mean, our kids were in debate club, and I was in awe as to what they were producing. But I thought, well, okay, I mean, it's debate club, it's self-selection. The students in 489, 689 don't self-select. It's a required course in our program. And these people can argue, and they can come up with arguments that I didn't know. They put things in context that they know outside. And I mean, this is also a praise to the much maligned American education system. Our international students are in shock. I mean, there are, when I have one student, so they can take, even graduate students who have their undergraduate from somewhere else can take the class as 689. I just have a student who is just in shock because she can't keep up, and so this is a course where students who have, and I saw that last fall already, that students for whom name or whatever suggests they might not have gone to an American high school are faring not nearly as well. And I mean, I think that I can, and I mean, I try hard when I grade to not see who I'm grading. Critical thinking skills are, from what I see, much better than I expected. And I mean, I think that's also something when we use social media. I mean, we're seeing primarily old people post. The young folks actually they use social media to share stuff. I mean, I mean, with our kids, sometimes they sort of preempt what I'm going to say, and why I think I've spent years at arriving at this deep insight, and it's commonplace. They preempt already what I'm going to be saying. So,
well, I'm also, I know we're at time, but the critical thinking skills in action, it might come from different venues. So I found that reading a piece of a document is much harder for students to do, because I think that's less, but this active being engaged with other people online, thinking quickly and reacting, that's great for critical reasoning, but the being able to read somebody's thoughts is really hard if it's in a book or it's a complex sort of thing.
yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think with a lot of these things, just there is change, and whether it's positive or negative is much less clear than it may.
Well, I have to draw, it's after actually 1 o'clock, so I'm going to draw this really interesting conversation to a close. I want to thank Professor Denton for this, another really interesting talk that makes you start thinking, oh, how does this fit into a whole bunch of different areas? It was, as you can see, I was thinking about how all this was structured. This event is recorded. When it is edited, it will be added to the Northern Plains Ethics Institute's YouTube channel. And it's of course available to all. If you have additional questions, I'm sure you could send them to either us or to Professor Denton so that she can answer them. She's always really good about thinking and talking about these different areas. I want to thank everyone for coming. Remember that in 2 weeks, we have the community discussion on free speech. What does free speech mean for community members? So going outside academia and having folks from outside talk about it too. Thanks, and it's harder to do this when you're online because I can't actually see you, but thanks for coming and thank you again.
Thank you.